Emma woke up to the soft morning light filtering through the curtains, casting a golden glow on the man lying beside her. Daniel's face was serene in sleep, his dark lashes resting against his cheekbones, his breathing even. He looked like her husband, felt like her husband, but lately, he hadn't been her husband. Something was different. She couldn't pinpoint when it started, but it was in the small things. The way he walked, the way he spoke, the way he held her at night, it all felt just a fraction off. She had tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to stress or exhaustion, but the feeling only grew stronger with each passing day. Emma slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen, her mind clouded with unease. She started preparing breakfast, expecting Daniel to come down in his usual half-awake state, grumbling about how much he needed his coffee. Instead, he walked in fully alert, rolling up his sleeves, smiling. "Morning," he greeted, pressing a kiss to her temple. His lips were warm, but the gesture felt unfamiliar. Emma hesitated. "You're up early. Thought I'd try something different today," he said, reaching for a plate. He scooped a generous portion of scrambled eggs onto it. Her hands stilled. "Scrambled eggs? You're eating eggs?" she asked carefully. Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, why?" Her stomach tightened. "You hate eggs." He paused mid-bite, then shrugged. "Guess my taste changed." That was the first real crack. Emma spent the rest of breakfast studying him. The way he held his fork was slightly different. He scrolled through his phone with his left hand more often now, despite being right-handed. When she mentioned an inside joke from their early dating days, he smiled, but there was a split-second delay, as if he was struggling to recall it. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything, and it terrified her. Emma tried to brush off the uneasy feeling lingering in her mind, convincing herself that people changed over time. Habits shifted, preferences evolved. Maybe Daniel was just going through a phase. But the feeling didn't go away. She watched him more closely over the following days, taking note of every subtle difference. The way he folded his shirts differently when doing laundry. The way he suddenly knew how to play chess when he had never shown an interest before. The way he smelled. His cologne was the same, but he smelled different underneath it, like a scent her subconscious recognized but couldn't place. Then there were the memories. "Remember when we got caught in that storm on our honeymoon?" Emma asked one evening, curling up beside him on the couch. Daniel gave her a small smile. "Yeah, how could I forget? We had to run back to the hotel through the rain." Emma's heart stilled. That wasn't what had happened. "We didn't run back," she said slowly, watching his reaction. "We stayed under that little cafe's awning until the rain stopped." He blinked, his expression unreadable.
"Oh, right.
That's what I meant." Something inside her twisted. He hadn't meant that. He had forgotten. And Daniel never forgot anything about their honeymoon. Emma lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling as her thoughts raced. If this isn't Daniel, then who is he? Her body went cold at the thought. It was absurd. Impossible. But the signs were everywhere. Her husband, or the man who looked like him, was different. Something had changed. Or someone had switched. Emma couldn't shake the dread curling in her stomach. She told herself it was just stress, that she was overthinking things. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the man she had married. She needed proof. The next morning, while Daniel was in the shower, she crept to his closet. Her fingers skimmed over his clothes, his belongings, searching for anything out of place. Everything looked the same, but the feeling of unfamiliarity lingered. Then she noticed something. His leather wallet sat on the dresser, slightly worn at the edges. Emma picked it up, her heart pounding. She flipped it open, scanning through his ID and credit cards. Everything looks fine. But then, tucked behind his driver's license, she found a small medical record card, one from a routine checkup just weeks ago. Her breath caught in her throat. Blood type. Oh. Emma nearly dropped the wallet. Her husband, Daniel, had always been blood type AB. She remembered it clearly because they had discussed it during their health checkups before getting married. It wasn't something that could change. Her hands trembled as she stuffed everything back into place. The man in the shower wasn't her husband. He looked like him, spoke like him, lived like him, but he wasn't Daniel. Then who is he? She barely made it through breakfast, her stomach twisted in knots. Every movement he made, every word he spoke, it all felt like a carefully rehearsed performance. She had to act normal. She couldn't let him suspect that she knew. But inside, Emma was screaming. That night, while he slept beside her, she lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. If this man wasn't Daniel, where was her real husband? Emma barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind conjured the worst possibilities. Where is Daniel? Is he alive? Is he in danger? And who is the man lying beside me, breathing so evenly, as if nothing is wrong? She turned her head slightly, watching his peaceful face in the moonlight. It was Daniel's face. Every line, every detail was the same. But she no longer trusted it. Morning came too soon, and Emma forced herself to act normal. She made breakfast as she always did, watched him sip his coffee like he always did. But the more she watched, the more her stomach churned. She couldn't keep sitting in silence. She needed answers. She waited until he left for work before she sprang into action. She started with the obvious, his documents. She checked his passport, his driver's license, his work ID. Everything looked the same. But the blood type on his medical card proved there was a lie buried somewhere. That wasn't enough. She checked his phone next. The passcode was the same, something that sent a small shiver of relief through her. If he had changed it, she wouldn't have been able to look. She scrolled through his call history, his messages, searching for anything unusual. And then she saw it. An unsaved number. Dozens of messages exchanged over the past month. Unknown number. She's noticing things. Be careful. Daniel. I'm handling it. She won't find out. Unknown number. You don't have much time. Emma's blood ran cold. Her breath came short and uneven as she stared at the screen. Her hands shook, her pulse roaring in her ears. Who is this person? And what do they mean by you don't have much time? Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She grabbed her coat and her car keys, adrenaline surging through her veins. She needed to follow him. Emma tailed his car at a safe distance, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. I shouldn't be doing this, she told herself. But the thought of going home and pretending everything was fine made her feel sick. Daniel, or whoever he was, wasn't heading to his office. He took an unfamiliar route, driving across town, eventually pulling into a small cafe. Emma parked a few spaces away, ducking low in her seat as she watched him step inside. A few minutes later, another man entered. Emma frowned. She had never seen this man before, tall, lean, with sharp eyes that darted around the cafe before he sat across from Daniel. She cracked her window open just enough to hear. She's starting to notice, the man said in a low voice. Daniel let out a slow breath. I know. I'm keeping her distracted. Not good enough. If she finds out the truth. I'll handle it, Daniel interrupted. The stranger leaned forward, his tone urgent. You don't understand. If she digs too deep, it's not just you in trouble. You know what's at stake. Emma's pulse hammered against her ribs. What's at stake? She couldn't listen anymore. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to leave. She started the car and drove away, her hands trembling against the wheel. Her husband was lying to her, hiding something huge. And now she knew for certain. Whoever this man was, he wasn't Daniel. But if he wasn't her husband, where was the real Daniel? Emma spent the rest of the day locked in their bedroom, her mind racing. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That her husband had been replaced by someone who looked exactly like him? They would think she was insane. No. She had to do this herself. She sat at her desk, pulled out her laptop, and started digging. She hacked into Daniel's email, something she had never done before, but desperation made her fearless. Most of it was normal, work-related messages, bills, newsletters. But then she found a single email thread that made her stomach drop. From D. Weston to J. Weston. Subject: urgent. You can't keep pretending forever. She'll figure it out. If she does, I don't know if we can fix this. We have to be careful. Emma stared at the screen, her heartbeat thunderous. J. Weston. Weston. Daniel's mother's maiden name. And then it hit her. The pieces slammed together so fast she nearly gasped. Daniel had a twin brother. A twin brother he had never spoken about. A twin brother who, as far as Emma knew, was dead. But he wasn't dead. He was right here, living as Daniel. Her hands shook as she leaned back in her chair. Daniel's twin had taken his place. But the biggest question remained, why? And more importantly, where was the real Daniel? Emma couldn't keep pretending. That night, as the man who wore her husband's face sat across from her at dinner, she set down her fork and met his gaze. "How long are you going to lie to me?" He froze. For a moment, silence filled the space between them, thick and suffocating. Then slowly, he put his fork down. His expression didn't shift, but his eyes, Daniel's eyes, darkened. "I don't know what you mean," he said evenly. Emma let out a humorless laugh. "You're not Daniel." His jaw tensed. "You changed too much," she continued. "The way you eat, the way you act. You forgot things you shouldn't forget. You might look like my husband, but you're not him." He exhaled sharply and leaned back, studying her. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "You're right." Emma's breath caught. She had prepared for denial, for more lies, but not for a confession. The man who looked like her husband tilted his head slightly. "How did you figure it out?" The casual way he asked made her blood run cold. "I found the emails," she whispered. "I know who you are. You're his brother." He didn't react. "So now what?" Emma swallowed. "Where is Daniel?" For the first time, something flickered in his expression.
Guilt.
"He's alive," he said softly. "But you weren't supposed to find out." Emma's hands clenched into fists. "Then tell me where he is." But instead of answering, he gave her a chilling smile. "Are you sure you want to know?" Emma's stomach twisted as she stared at the man across from her. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to know where Daniel is." For a moment, her husband's twin, Jacob, she now knew, watched her in silence. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You were never supposed to get involved." "Don't give me that," Emma snapped. "You stole my husband's life. You've been lying to me for months. I think I deserve the truth." Jacob leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "You won't like what you hear." "I don't care." He studied her for a moment, then finally he spoke. "Daniel's in hiding." Emma's pulse quickened. Hiding from what? Jacob hesitated before answering. "From the people who want him dead." Her breath caught. "What?" Jacob's expression turned serious. "Daniel got himself into trouble with the wrong people. He found out something he shouldn't have, and now they want him gone. He didn't have a choice. He had to disappear." Emma shook her head. "That doesn't explain why you took his place." Jacob sighed. "Because if he just vanished, they'd come looking. They'd come after you. So I stepped in to make sure no one suspected anything." Emma's skin went cold. "You expect me to believe that you did all of this just to protect me?" Jacob's lips pressed into a thin line. "Believe what you want. But the truth is, if I hadn't taken his place, you'd be dead by now." Emma's mind raced. She wanted to believe he was lying, that there was some other explanation. But deep down, something told her he was telling the truth. Still, one thing didn't make sense. If Daniel's in hiding, why hasn't he contacted me? Why hasn't he let me know he's safe? Jacob's jaw tightened. "Because he knew you'd come looking for him." Emma felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. "That's not fair. He just left me like this." Jacob hesitated. "He left because he loves you." The words knocked the air out of her lungs. He knew that if you found out what was going on, you'd never stop until you found him, and that would get you killed. Emma's throat tightened. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "So what? You were just going to live as him forever? Pretend to be my husband for the rest of my life?" Jacob didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, something unreadable in his expression. "No," he finally said. "Just long enough to keep you safe." Emma stared at him, her heart pounding. There was something in his voice, something that made her uneasy. Something that told her there was still more to this story. Emma didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Jacob's words over and over in her head. Her husband was alive. He had left her to protect her. And his twin, whom she hadn't even known existed, had been living as him ever since. But something wasn't right. Jacob had said too much. Or maybe not enough. She needed to find Daniel herself. The next morning, she waited until Jacob left for work before making her move. She grabbed her laptop and started tracing the emails she had found the night before. If Daniel was in hiding, he had to be contacting someone. An hour later, she had a lead. An encrypted email traced back to an old account, one Daniel used years ago, before they were even married. Emma's hands trembled as she typed out a message. "I know you're alive. I need to see you." She hit send and waited. Nothing. Minutes passed. Then hours. Then night fell, and still, no response. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe he really was gone for good. Then, just past midnight, her phone buzzed. One new message. Unknown number. "Meet me at the pier. Midnight. Come alone." Emma's heart stopped. She grabbed her coat and ran. The pier was quiet when she arrived. A cold wind rolled off the water, chilling her to the bone. She clutched her coat tighter, scanning the shadows. Then she saw him. Daniel. He stepped out from the darkness, looking just as she remembered. But there was something different about him, something heavier in his eyes. Emma's breath hitched. "Daniel." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You weren't supposed to find me." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. "How could you leave me like that?" His gaze softened. "I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice," she snapped. "You could have trusted me." Daniel sighed. "Emma, I love you. But if I had stayed, they would have killed you. I had to disappear." Tears burned in her eyes. "And what? You thought Jacob could just take your place? That I wouldn't notice?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Jacob was the only one I trusted to protect you." Emma clenched her fists. "Protect me from what? Daniel? Who are you running from?" Daniel hesitated. Then, finally, he said, "The people I worked for." Emma froze. "Your company?" Daniel nodded. "I found out something I wasn't supposed to. Something dangerous. They wanted me dead for it." Emma shook her head. "So what happens now?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Now, you forget you ever saw me." Emma's heart clenched.
No.
"I can't just walk away." "You have to." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Daniel, please." He cupped her face gently, his touch warm against her cold skin. "I love you, Emma. But if you stay, you'll die." She shook her head. "I'd rather be with you than live without you." A sad smile crossed his lips. "Then you'll have to run with me." Emma's breath hitched. "What?" "I can't stay. They'll find me. But if you come with me, we can start over. Somewhere far away." Her heart pounded. This was it. The moment that would change everything. She could leave behind everything she knew, run away with the man she loved, and never look back. Or she could stay. Live a normal life. Pretend like this never happened. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't know what to do. But then, she looked into his eyes, Daniel's eyes. And she made her choice. Emma's breath came in short, uneven gasps. Her mind screamed at her to run, to demand answers, to refuse the impossible choice Daniel had just given her. But her heart had already decided. She swallowed hard. "If I come with you, will I ever be safe?" Daniel's hand tightened around hers. "No," he admitted, "but we'll be together." Her heart ached at the words. Together. That was all she had wanted since the day he vanished. But at what cost? Her entire life, her home, her job, her identity. She would have to leave it all behind. And what about Jacob? A sharp pang of guilt hit her. He had lived as Daniel for months, keeping her safe, caring for her in his own way. And though she had fought against it, she couldn't deny that somewhere in those moments, something had changed between them. Jacob was nothing like Daniel. He was harsher, more closed off, but he had been there. When Daniel had left, Jacob had stayed. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe. "Daniel, I don't know if I can do this." He let go of her hand. For the first time, she saw the fear in his eyes, the understanding that she might not choose him. "You don't have to decide right now," he said softly. "But I can't stay here much longer. I leave in an hour." Emma's heart pounded. An hour. If she walked away now, she might never see him again. If she stayed, she might never forgive herself. She turned, her mind spinning, and walked away from the pier. Every step away from Daniel felt like a blade twisting in her chest. But she needed time. Time to think. She barely made it to her car before a familiar voice called her name. "Emma." She turned sharply. Jacob stood by the street lamp, hands in his pockets, watching her with an unreadable expression. "You followed me?" she asked. Jacob exhaled, stepping closer. "I had a feeling you'd come looking for him." Her throat tightened. "Did you know where he was this whole time?" Jacob was silent for a moment before he finally nodded. "Yes." A sharp sting of betrayal cut through her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew it would come to this," Jacob said quietly. "I knew he'd ask you to leave with him. And I knew you'd have to make a choice." Emma's voice trembled. "Then why are you here?" Jacob hesitated, then said, "Because I need to know, before you go running after him, if you ever felt anything for me." The words hit her like a shockwave. Emma's lips parted, but nothing came out. She wanted to deny it, to say that Jacob had only ever been an imposter, a shadow of the man she loved. But the truth was she had felt something. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something she couldn't ignore. Tears welled in her eyes. "Jacob, I don't know." Jacob let out a breath, his jaw tightening. "Then let me make this easy for you." Before she could react, he reached out, cupping her face, and kissed her. It was nothing like Daniel's kisses, soft, filled with unspoken words. Jacob's kiss was desperate, raw, filled with everything he hadn't said. When he pulled away, he whispered, "Stay." Emma's heart shattered. Two men. Two paths. One choice. The clock struck midnight. Daniel stood at the pier, waiting. His fingers curled into fists as he glanced at his watch. She wasn't coming. A heavy weight settled in his chest. He had known deep down that this was a possibility. That Emma had spent too long believing him dead, too much time with Jacob pretending to be him. But he had hoped. His phone vibrated. A single message. "Emma, I can't go with you. I can't stay either. I have to find my own way now." Daniel closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. She had made her choice. And so had he. Without another look back, he disappeared into the night. Emma didn't go home that night. She didn't go back to Jacob, and she didn't run after Daniel. Instead, she booked a one-way ticket to another city, another life. Because for the first time in years, she realized she didn't belong to either of them. Her future was her own. And it was time to start living for herself. The city lights stretched endlessly before her, shimmering reflections dancing on the water as Emma stood on the balcony of her new apartment. The crisp evening air carried the distant hum of life, voices, music, the occasional horn from the street below. It had been 6 months since she left. 6 months of learning how to be alone. 6 months of wondering if she had made the right choice. At first, the loneliness had been suffocating. She had spent days second-guessing herself, staring at her phone, debating whether to call either of them. The nights were the worst, when her mind would drift to Daniel's warmth, to the way he had always known how to make her laugh. Or to Jacob's steady presence, the way he had understood her in ways she never expected. But she had chosen herself. For the first time in her life, she was building something entirely her own. The unfamiliar city had become a home. She had found a job she loved, nothing glamorous, but it gave her purpose. She had made friends, built a routine, created a life that had nothing to do with the past. And yet, there were moments like now when she still thought about them. Daniel.
Jacob.
She had loved one and been drawn to the other, but in the end, she had left them both. A soft chime from her phone broke the silence. She glanced at the screen, expecting another email or a reminder. But instead, it was a message. From an unknown number. Her fingers hesitated before opening it. Unknown. So you really did disappear. Her heart skipped. She didn't recognize the number, but she knew. Jacob. Of course, it would be him. Daniel would never reach out. He had accepted her decision that night at the pier without question. But Jacob? He had always been the one who refused to let go easily. She debated ignoring it. But then, after a deep breath, she replied, Emma, I needed to. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Jacob, did it work? Her fingers hovered over the screen.
Did it?
Emma looked out over the city she had come to love, over the life she had built from scratch. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, naive, blindly devoted to a love she had believed was unbreakable. She had lost everything that night when she discovered the truth. But maybe, just maybe, she had gained something even more important. Herself. Her lips curved into a soft, knowing smile as she typed her reply. Emma, yes. She set her phone down and turned back to the city, breathing in the night air. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. And she wasn't looking back.